Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name is Matt.
And my name is Jadrian.
And we are thrilled to have Brian Hollar. Am I pronouncing your last name correct, Brian?
You are.
Awesome. Brian is joining us today to talk about economics in the Bible, or biblical stories and how they relate to economics. We figure we're dropping this in the holiday season for multiple different religions, and this might be a kind of a interesting way to think about the world in a little bit of a different way. So, Brian, thank you so much for being here. And Jadrian and I drew straws, and he gets to do the formal introduction for our audience.
I nominated Brian, so I get to introduce Brian. I have known Brian for, he might be able to correct me, I'm going to say years. We'll just leave it up to single-digit years, maybe double digits, but getting close. Around double digits.
Ish. Yeah.
So Brian is a professor at Marymount University, and he has, I think, a fantastic and incredibly interesting background, which I'm sure he'll happily talk about. He is a Virginia Tech alumni, which is really fun, except not in economics. Brian has a degree in mechanical engineering from Virginia Tech, an MBA from the University of Florida, and a JD PhD from George Mason. He is an economist. He got his PhD in economics, but he has a very cool background as it comes to engineering, MBA, business, law, econ, all sorts of cool stuff. And fun fact we just learned 3 minutes ago, Brian has also traveled to 101 different countries.
I'm still in awe. I heard it, just before we came on air.
Matt was in awe of the 28.
I'm actually, that's around where I am, I think.
Okay.
Nice.
But the 101 is like next level, and that's pretty fantastic. So and so Marymount, that's near Washington DC, or in the Washington DC area?
It is. We're inside the Beltway. We're first of all, thank you for having me on. It's a delight to be here with you guys. And we are located in Arlington, Virginia, which is inside the Beltway, about, I'm guessing about 5 miles from the Potomac, if not closer, 3 to 5 miles. We're like a 5-minute, with the campus that I teach on is about 5-minute walk to the metro, which takes you straight into DC.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Nice, low cost of living area, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Notice he said walk. So that is also a fun fact about Brian I'm going to share now that I just remembered it. Brian, I don't know if you're still doing it, does not have a car.
That's correct. Correct.
Okay.
So I had a truck that died in 2019, and I thought I'd do a 1-year experiment to live without a car. And then the pandemic hit. There was no place to go, so I didn't get a car. Then car prices shot way up. And even when I had a car, I was probably driving once a week, if that. And so it's just a lot cheaper to Uber and rent a car when I need it than it is to own a car. So it definitely makes window shopping a little tougher, but that could have some positive financial benefit too.
Yeah. That's really cool. Jadrian, you can go ahead and start this part then. So
even though we are talking about biblical stories and religious stories and economics, that will not prevent Matt and I from having a drink. So
my Lord and Savior turned water into wine. So I view that as the sign that this is okay.
Yeah.
So I am having, we talked about this in a previous episode, Matt's first trip, I think, to a Trader Joe's that had alcohol. I have also went to a Trader Joe's that had alcohol since moving to Virginia. And I have picked up the Joseph Brau Hefeweizen from Trader Joe's. So I'm having a Hefeweizen today.
Okay. And I am having a repeat drink in a growler. That's a Marzoni's beer. And once again, I've had this before, but Timber Ghost Realty mug, which is my family's real estate company in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm at the office. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just going to ask, you mentioned office, so I'm quite as alcoholic.
I'm still at the office, so I'm going to be boring with a A&W root beer.
Root beer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Root beer. Yeah.
I'm more of an A&W. I'm a cream soda guy, but root beer's pretty good too.
I figured you guys be having beer, so I ought to get as close as I can.
There's beer in the title.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Well, cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
To be fair, some of our very first episodes, after launching a podcast about drinking and talking about economics, Matt decided to spend an entire month abstaining from alcohol. So you're not the first non-drinking guest. And we even had a non-drinking host for a month.
There were even office visits where there have been times we've each been in the office too, where we've had to not drink.
Sure.
So which to all of the high school and college students, it shows you do not need to drink to have fun.
No, you do not.
And Jadrian, how did you like that beer that you just tried?
I'll share with you at the end how I feel about it.
Okay, you don't
Matt has had this beer before, so
I have no shame to say I gave it a very low rating. Trader Joe's does not sponsor us, and probably now they never will. But
give me let me see how I feel in 30 minutes. I will go with that.
Okay.
Well, I will say one thing. Say one thing about A&W is that always reminds me of my grandma and grandpa, my dad's parents. There's a A&W stand right across the street from where they live. So every time we go up to Michigan and go visit them, we always saw A&W, and so that always makes me think of them.
Cool.
I love A&W.
Little extra value from sentimental value from I don't need extra excuses to have soda. That would give me one.
I had my Coke before this, so this is my second drink of tonight. So, and I'll have another one probably with my dinner.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
So, economics in the Bible are biblical stories. So this is an area, Brian, and you've done work in this area before.
So I have. So let me. This work in particular, I've been working on with Jadrian and also with Amel Ben Abdesalam. I think I'm saying her last name correctly. She's a colleague of mine here at Marymount. We always call her Dr. Amel. But she's kind of the one who kind of had the seed of the idea for the topic of writing, using biblical stories to illustrate basic economic concepts. Part of my dissertation or my specialty in grad school is actually, we had to choose like 2 fields to specialize in. And one of mine was, didn't know I could make the balloons.
It's a peace sign. The peace sign will make the balloons.
Oh, that's cool.
Sometimes.
I'm like, this A&W is really good. But they, in grad school, my 2 fields were public choice, which is like the economics of politics, and then economics of religion. So it's kind of like the 2 things you're not supposed to talk about from the worst possible perspective, economics.
You were really popular at parties, I bet.
Right, absolutely. So my dissertation work was not on biblical stuff per se, but it was looking at how religiosity affects rates and stability of marriage. So I've done a lot of research on religion. I did have a paper on kind of a public choice analysis of different denominations and how denominational hierarchies create larger and smaller transaction costs for decision making, how that denominations that are highly hierarchical and Protestant denominations tend to make slower decisions, and that can affect how well they adapt to societal change. So this topic, though, is quite a bit different, where we're actually delving into biblical stories to try to illustrate basic economic concepts. The idea here is that we're trying to stick with stories from the first 5 books of the Bible. They're things that should be familiar to not only Christians, but also to Muslims, to Jews, people of Abrahamic faith, for lack of a better term. And just trying to, and there's a lot of popular culture that goes with this, a lot of history that goes with this. Certainly Christianity's had a big influence on, Christianity and Judaism have had a big influence on Western culture. Islam has had a big influence on the Middle East, parts of Africa, and parts of Asia. And so this is something that we think would be appealing to a lot of people. We tie into popular culture, so it should be accessible to more secular audiences, secular schools, as well as religious-based schools. And so it's something that we're trying to be very inclusive in our approach on this topic.
Yeah, that is incredibly cool. Although, even though when I was prepping and I was thinking of a couple stories in mind that I might be able to ask about, they're both New Testament. So you've completely ruined that part for me. But it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
So what is, as you're thinking through the stories, I'm curious for both of you, since you've both worked on this, and Brian, we'll start with you. What's your favorites of the stories to illustrate an economic concept?
So one of my favorite examples is Noah's Ark. It's from Genesis, and it's where God gets frustrated with kind of how wicked humanity has become, and he just is ready to just start over, kind of do away with all of it. He saves Noah and Noah's wife and his sons and their wives, and one of every animal. A few animals he saves 7 of, but 7 pairs of, I should say. But the idea here that that this illustrates is God avoiding sunk cost fallacy. He's just like, let's just start over. This is not working out. Let's start over again. And I think it's a good example of the sunk cost, avoiding sunk cost fallacy. You can also use it to think about what would the world be like after this? How would that affect production, productivity, standards of living, production possibility frontiers? So there's a lot of different takes that you can do with this.
Yeah, taking a step back.
Yeah.
I would imagine many of our listeners know the sunk cost fallacy, but probably not all. So sunk cost fallacy, I will try to give my quick definition, and you can correct me or come up with a better one. But it is the idea, a sunk cost is a cost that's been incurred, and you have paid it, and it will be paid regardless of whatever future direction you would take. The sunk cost fallacy is the idea that you weigh that into consideration of what the next best move is. Because if a cost has been made and it's irretrievable, it really should be ignored. And what you should be doing instead is, what are the benefits of action A, or what are the benefits of action B? Not, should I continue with action A because I put all of this investment into it, or should I switch to action B? Does that seem reasonable? Anything to add?
I think it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe this economic teaching thing will work out for me.
So let me give a non-biblical example to help out. And this, this is going to be one of those goofy moments, and I think both of us can agree on this. Even though we know you're not supposed to weigh sunk costs in your decision making, I fall victim to this fallacy regularly. So the sunk cost fallacy for people just doing like regular everyday things would be things like you ordered food and took it home, and then you're sitting down to eat it and you realize you don't like it. And then for some people, they continue to eat it. And they're just like, I already paid for it, so I'm going to keep eating it. That would be sort of in that space of sunk cost fallacy. Or the example I always give is if you're watching a movie on Netflix and you don't like it, very easy to turn it off. People turn it off all the time. But if you go to a movie, buy a ticket, and you're sitting there and you hate it, people will sit there and go, well, I already paid for the ticket. I'm going to sit here and watch it anyway. So sunk cost fallacy would be sitting through a movie you hate, when realistically, sort of the Netflix version, the opportunity cost is what matters. Walk out of that movie, turn it off, walk away.
As a good economist, I will tell you, I have first acted some theater productions that after the first act, I'm like, I'm done.
Oh, wow.
Now I won't be so rude as to like stand up in the middle and let them see me leaving. It's been very rare, but that's sunk cost fallacy. That's a fascinating one though with Noah's Ark. I had never thought about it that way. And I mean, I've heard the story.
Yeah. I appreciated your in the middle of that, because that's how I feel like, it's a really good story. If you can get another economist to go, that's interesting.
Well, often I think the best economic work are things that somebody does something and it makes total sense. And then you wonder, how in the world didn't I think of that before? Yeah. It's the things that seem obvious in hindsight, but nobody was talking about it before, to me are the most brilliant discoveries. So I think that's a fantastic example. So
I'll share my weave in here. Brian is definitely I will say, I've joked and called him the biblical scholar, even though he hates this comment, because he's like, that's not me. My knowledge of the Bible is significantly lower. However, when he was explaining it all to me, I go, oh, you know what? There's a movie, Evan Almighty, that's about Noah's Ark. And I go, there's scenes that we could clip from Evan Almighty. So I'm sitting there going like, I've seen the movies or I've seen TV shows about a lot of these stories. So that's my contribution. It is not in biblical accuracy.
And I'll have to say that is a terrible, awful movie. But it has some good clips.
Definitely we're crossing sponsors off left and right.
Yeah. Today. But it's that's absolutely right. It's a good movie with some good clips in it, some good visuals for what the arc might have looked like.
Well, so I have a question I'm going to ask you about a second clip that I'd like you to share, because I know for a fact that Brian, I know for a fact that Matt is going to love this next clip. If you could please describe the economics associated with Joseph and his brothers, because there is a musical and Matt loves musicals.
Yep.
That I know he's gonna love.
I've seen Joseph a couple times.
Yeah, it's a fantastic. Unlike Evan Almighty, that is fantastic. So yeah, fantastic musical. But yeah, it's a musical about Joseph and the coat of many colors. And Joseph was the son of Jacob, who was later called Israel, who's the son of Isaac, who was uh, God had called Abraham to sacrifice and later send a lamb in lieu of the sacrifice. And Isaac was the son of Abraham. So anyone who's familiar with the song, like Father Abraham had many sons, so that would make Joseph his great grandson. And so there's a couple stories that come out of Joseph's life that I think teach some pretty good economics. The first is when Joseph had 11 brothers, and so he was one of 12 kids, and he grew up having dreams. Actually, it was 12 other brothers. I had one younger brother, Benjamin, but he had dreams where he was ruling over his other brothers, ruling over his father. He had multiple dreams like this. He told his brothers about it, and of course his brothers got very upset, thought he was just full of himself, did not like him. To make matters worse, Joseph was the favorite son of his father, and so the brothers were very, very jealous, and so the brothers conspired to kill Joseph. They were out away from home and ended up throwing him into a pit, taking his coat of many colors. It was a gift from his father, and they're trying to figure out how to kill him. And they saw this band of Ishmaelites, who were like a tribe in the region, come by, and they ended up saying, well, why kill him? We can just sell him into slavery, and then we can make some money off of this too. So they ended up selling him into slavery. They took his coat, kind of shredded it up, smothered it with goat's blood, and then showed it to their dad and told them that a wild animal had killed their brother. Meanwhile, Joseph gets sold into slavery in Egypt and ends up getting falsely accused of a crime of trying to make advances towards the man who had bought him to be his servant, gets thrown into prison for several years, interprets the dreams of a couple individuals, and then they end up getting out of one of them gets out of prison, becomes cupbearer to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh starts having these dreams, and the cupbearer suddenly remembers Joseph in prison and tells the Pharaoh, hey, I know this guy and met this guy in prison who can interpret dreams. And so ended up the Pharaoh called on him, and Joseph interpreted the Pharaoh's dreams, and there's some things that ensue from that. So I'll talk about the dreams in a minute, but first I'll start off talking about the getting sold into slavery. And this has several dimensions, several economic concepts that come into play here. One is asking the question of why would the brothers change their decision from killing him to selling him into slavery. And you can think about, what's the self-interested behavior here that might cause that. You can think about this could tie into discussions on the economics of slavery. You can talk about things like the profit motive and how this can motivate people to do things that they feel are going to be, the brothers felt that they were going to be better off selling him into slavery than they would if they had just killed him. And so that's one concept that can come from this. I want to pause if anybody has any questions, but I have a few other concepts that I could take from this story. The other ideas, things that could tie into this is why was slavery allowed to happen in this environment? Something that doesn't happen in modern America, although, certainly there's unfortunately history of slavery in the US, history of slavery in many parts of the world. Still, slavery occurs in certain places. And what is it about the times and places where slavery existed versus, say, contemporary America? And this could lead into good discussions on institutions. One of Joseph's brothers was secretly wanting to come back and save Joseph. He wanted to leave him in the pit. They threw him in a pit and he was trying to convince his brothers to just leave him there to basically die. And he was planning on coming back to secretly come back and save him. And this is where, you could ask the question of, well, why was he keeping that information private? You could get into some discussions of game theory, asymmetric information, things like that. The fact that Joseph got sold into slavery means that there was trade that happened. You can talk about trade going on in this context and what, just the two parties engaging in exchange. So there's a lot of different takes that you could have with the beginning of the story. And this is like one of many stories you could tap into from Joseph's life. Another example would be when you think about Joseph and the Pharaoh, when Joseph goes to, after he gets released from, or, taken out of prison to come interpret the Pharaoh's dreams. The Pharaoh is having a dream that of 7 fat cows that ended up getting, sounds kind of funny to say, but he's dreaming of these 7 fat cows, and then these 7 skinny cows come up and eat the fat cows.
We'll assume everybody's seen the musical, because it's a great song.
Absolutely, right?
Like the Elvis version of the Pharaoh comes out here. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fantastic musical. There's a musical, if you search on YouTube, you can see a full-length version of the musical. And this is one of many popular culture references that you could use to teach stories like this. Spotify has the songs from the musical itself, and they're fantastic songs. It's a play by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and just fantastic music, fantastic visuals. Just definitely one of my favorite plays that I've seen. When Joseph goes to interpret the Pharaoh's dreams, he says, okay, well, the 7 fat cows represent 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And the Pharaoh is so impressed with Joseph's ability to interpret his dreams that he ends up putting Joseph in charge of preparing kind of the kingdom to preparing Egypt to prepare for to get ready for the famine. And Joseph ends up basically taxing people, gathering a lot of grain in preparation for the famine. They store up a lot of grain in wherever the Pharaoh kept his grain, and they use that to give to the people as the famine kicks in. And the people keep finding themselves kind of in lower and lower positions. So you get this kind of concentration of power for the Pharaoh from these events. And you can think about things going on like this is kind of a monopoly situation. You can think about it as being an example of fiscal policy, kind of taxing and spending. Kind of the government is collecting or spending on grain when you're having a economic expansion, and then they're spending. They're giving out the bounty or the grain when the times are scarce.
Like standard macroeconomics would suggest, right? If you're in the bad times, you should be either lowering taxes or increasing government spending. When you're in the good times, that's the time to cut back and pay off the debt. I actually put in a link. Taxes. I put in a link because that song is on Broadway Economics. I put that specific Joseph song onto the Broadway Economics website, which this will be my.
You could have contributed to this conversation. You had answers. You didn't even realize it.
I could have, and this will be my. I'm calling this my pop culture in advance reference. So
okay,
Matt's calling dibs on the pop culture.
Dibs. But it's kind of fascinating, right? I mean, he recommends, okay, you need to do economic planning and figure out what you can do to, in the good times, to store up and save so that in the bad times, things will be a little bit smoother.
Absolutely. It's kind of like what you'd learn in principles of macro. It's kind of textbook example. And I think it's something that until we started on this project, I don't think I'd really considered in those terms, but it's something that's a very real example of good macroeconomic policy being implemented in ancient biblical times, which I think is kind of cool.
You're going to make me go back and listen to the early part of the score to see is there a way to pull one of the earlier songs and put that on the website now as well. Although, because you mentioned your 2 areas earlier were public choice, and I've often thought about this, right? Like the cycles of the economy. I mean, if you go through the song, like it talks about the cycles of the economy and how, you could lower taxes or increase spending during a recession. And then, of course, you're incurring debt, which you pay off during the good times. But then public choice suggests, no, politicians never really do that because their incentive really isn't to do the public good. I mean, I think everybody comes in, but their incentive really is to get reelected, which I've never actually thrown that into the song. I'm wondering if I need to do like a second version of this song.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to consider, because I think what like public choice in a democracy, you'd want to get reelected. In a non-democracy, you would want to maximize not be assassinated and maximize political support from stakeholders, right? And so just having people who are benefiting from the status quo or from the political situation that you maintain is kind of what is important. You can think about places, like maybe North Korea, where they're certainly not a democracy, but that there are certain stakeholders that need to continue to benefit from the current system in order for that current system to maintain itself. It'd be fascinating to go back and look at what those institutions would have been in ancient Egypt. It'd be interesting to know if we even know what those institutions would be.
Yeah.
So Brian, you sort of said it, but maybe I'll ask to be clear, just to make sure. Do you talk about these in your principles class? Like you're at a Catholic university. Do you find yourself sort of weaving in biblical stories as examples? Like not everyone's Catholic, but
that is a great question. And unfortunately, I'm ashamed to say I have not. And so this is something that working on the project has definitely got me thinking in more detail on. And it's something that I absolutely should start doing. Next time I'm trying to remember. I think I'm teaching principles of macro this spring. I am the poster child for the absent-minded professor, and I just got out of class right before getting on the podcast. But I'm pretty sure I'm teaching that next semester. So if I am, I will definitely incorporate these lessons in there.
Yeah. What class were you teaching? I'm kind of curious.
So what
class did you just finish? Yeah.
So research methods. So going over using, it's kind of like advanced econometrics, where I have the students do a lot of research papers. So teaching them how to, we've actually been playing around a little bit with ChatGPT. It's got some really good data analysis stuff that just kicked in, and does great for like giving instructions for how to use things like Stata and stuff like that. We're using a lot of Stata, and today we were going over using VLOOKUP on Excel to kind of merge data sets, which has been kind of fun for me and confusing for my students. So
that's your MBA showing. That's
yeah.
I love vertical lookups.
Yeah.
So Jadrian, was that your, like I mentioned, I asked wanted one of each. Was that your favorite from the paper?
So I will say, no, my favorite is definitely the Noah's Ark one. Absolutely my favorite. So I will say my contribution to the paper when Brian first approached me on this paper, I think Brian had like 20 ideas. There were like 20 different scenes. And I was like, you can't do that. That's going to be completely overwhelming. We can't do that much for one paper. So he was gracious. We sort of, I'm going to say it's Brian and Amel, narrowed it down to a handful of them. My contribution, I think the only one that I even pitched out as an idea wasn't even my idea. I got it from a Freakonomics, one of the Freakonomics books. It talks about King Solomon splitting the baby in half and using that as an example of like a separating equilibrium of like, how do we get the mother to reveal who's the real mother? So sort of a game theory related book, but it's not one of the first 5. So it didn't make the cut into the sort of the final paper.
Cut, no pun intended. Yeah.
That's really good. I didn't intend
it. Was not intended, literally.
Yeah. Maybe that should be the footnote. We should say we wanted to include the story, but it didn't make the cut.
You've been working on this paper. Is this like going to be submitted to like Journal of Economics Teaching or somewhere? Or
so that's something we need to discuss. So we got to regroup and kind of discuss where we want to target this for. But that'd definitely be one of the high contenders for submitting the paper. So that's something that
to bring Jet Set into this one more episode, as though at some point we will stop talking about Jet Set.
No, but Jet Set
Jet Set's awesome.
Are we able to say where it is? Are we able to?
No, we can say. I can definitely say it if you want me to say it now, or we can save it. It's up to you.
Well, why don't we say it now? Right?
Jet Set 2024 will be held the first weekend in August. I wish I had the dates. I really should have known the dates now. So now I'm just see if I can like furiously look this up and jump ahead. Jet Set 2024 will be held August 1st through August 3rd, Thursday through Saturday, in beautiful Blacksburg, Virginia. So it will be hosted by Virginia Tech. So we're going to have it, we'll have it down here. So Brian definitely has to come since he's an alumni. So he'll have to schedule this in his summer travel plans to come back to Blacksburg for a little bit.
So that's exciting.
Very cool.
Brian has it easy because Brian will say yes to this. Blacksburg is an incredibly beautiful campus, especially in the summer. It's a really great place to be. I think it's going to be really good.
I'm excited to. I've never been there. I'm excited to see Blacksburg, and of course for another jet set. So I have. You've each mentioned one. So I looked up a couple ahead of time, but I will only share one, and I'm trying to figure out which one would be better to share. But I thought I'll ask Brian. Are you familiar with the parable of the talents?
Yes.
The Catholic University. So that was one kind of what, as you're thinking through, like I'm trying to think through the various biblical stories, and I am not an expert by any means, but this is this is relayed in the gospel, but it's in a couple different gospels. But the idea on this is the landowner of the area is going away and entrusts 3 of his servants or slaves, depending what you're reading, with some of the resources, some of the talents, which is like a unit of currency at the time.
Yeah. And
gives out, so they're all each given some of the talents and said, I'm entrusting you with these, do your best with them. 2 of them go out and essentially invest the talents, and the coming back saying, I took your resources and I was able to make more resources with them. One of them said, you entrusted me to keep them safe. I dug a hole in the ground, I buried them, and here they are. And the landowner was very upset at the one who simply chose to make it safe. And so I heard this as a kid, and the first one's making it something like, my thought was, they're keeping it safe. Why would you punish the person? And the other 2, they'll go out to invest it. And I found that it's a story that has gotten older. I found it a little bit more interesting and like relating to the idea of investing, the idea of capital, using capital, and using capital to produce items. Also a little bit about personal finance and what you should do in terms of saving versus investing. But I don't know if you might have any other spins on that particular story.
I think it'd be a good example of opportunity cost, kind of like just you're squandering an opportunity to make yourself better off. Definitely an example of talking about profit. Could even get into maybe principal agent problems, where the servant was not acting as a good agent for his master. And so there's a bunch. Those are kind of some takes that pop into my head just kind of off the cuff. But I think there's a lot of good nuggets in there that you could really draw on. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. So I don't know, Jadrian, if you'd heard that story before.
No, I hadn't. So I went to Sunday school as a kid, and that's about as far as my training. I stopped when I had to.
My wife taught Bible school for a while, so I probably heard the stories a little bit more often. And then I went to a Catholic school from 3rd grade to 7th grade. Okay. So actually literally had to study it for part of the grade for a while. Yeah. So that's we do like to close the show with thinking a little bit about pop culture, and I mentioned that for those who are interested, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat musical. There's a song on Broadway Economics, and we will link to it in the show notes. But it does do a nice job of thinking through the idea of economic cycles and what the government could do to respond to those particular cycles. Jadrian and Brian, I mean, we've talked about the Bible, so we could just simply say, look, kind of all of this was about economics in, I don't want to say pop culture, but within literature. Any, I don't know if anything else jumps out at you that you might want to share.
I will add none, because I am not knowledgeable at all. I will tell you, I can tell you there was Evan Almighty and Bruce Almighty were movies. There are, what was the Veggie Tales have some great clips about these stories. But no, I cannot add anything of meaning. So I'll give my time to Brian if he wants double time.
Like Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat is like one of my favorite references. We've got some examples from the life of Moses. That the Prince of Egypt would be another great example of popular culture. The 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston. That's classic example.
So, the Prince.
Go ahead.
If I could pause, the Prince of Egypt. You're talking the movie. There was a musical released, and I literally watched it. And when I watch, in the back of my mind afterwards, I'm trying to think, okay, what could I put on Broadway and Broadway economics? And I don't know that I found any.
We
So
have the man to help
maybe
you.
I should talk to you offline and see, is there a song or
Yeah.
two we could add? So.
Oh, that's a great question. Like I'm thinking more the cartoon version. I have not seen the Broadway version, but there's
I could take
definitely
anything where they sing can go on.
yeah. But no, definitely some good lessons from Moses and his story. So Prince of Egypt, Ten Commandments by Charlton Heston, then also just the Bible itself as literature, I think is a for a lot of people it's a holy book, and for even if you're not a religious person yourself, it still is really deep literature that has had a tremendous impact on Western culture that I think is good for all people to be familiar with. And it's a lot of other literature ties into it, and I'm blanking right now as to try to come up with some good examples for that. But definitely a lot of literature throughout history has drawn Western literature, anyways, has drawn on a lot of biblical stories.
Super. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really fascinating for me to think through topics in a completely different way. And as Jadrian mentioned, when an economist goes, huh, like in that tone, usually it's I don't know if it's the ultimate sign of respect, but it definitely is.
I'm spoiled because Brian hooked me in a year and a half ago at the first Jet Set, or 2 Jet Sets ago. And I have dropped the ball in terms of getting this paper moving along. However, I will recommit. Hopefully, it's one of those. The semesters get really busy, life happens, and I think for all of us, we sort of put it on the back burner. So hopefully, there will be a paper coming out soon.
Yeah, that's true for Jadrian, for all of us on the project. So we definitely need to re-engage, and we'll be I'll make that a priority for the next coming month or two. Yeah, awesome. But looking forward to diving back into it. So we got a lot of good foundation laid, and looking forward to.
Listen, we're talking about it on a podcast, so this is like a commitment device.
Yeah, right.
We talked about it. We have to do it now.
Yeah,
exactly.
And well, that's something for the rest of us to look forward to. So, Brian, it's wonderful to kind of chit chat with you a little bit. Jadrian, nice to see you again, and to everybody else, thanks for listening, and cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.